So I'm still recovering from the recent St. Patrick's Day. It's often kind of harvest time for the bagpiper. Long day, a fun day, and often a time for us to make a little money. When it comes to advertising yourself as a piper, when you're ready to play some funerals, some weddings, that kind of stuff, do you have any tips or tricks for a person to go about, advertising themselves and then also negotiating pricing?
Okay.
After, when they get hired for stuff? Because that can be a whole different skill set, aside from having learned the instrument.
Yes, absolutely. The first thing I would say is the first thing that I would say about playing gigs is that it's sometimes more serious. It's a more serious topic than sometimes we give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I strongly believe that if you don't know how to sound good and play well consistently, I personally believe it's not the right thing to do to be playing weddings and funerals.
So, do you feel like that's mostly that feeling is motivated by doing good by the instrument and the other players, or is it also motivated by doing good by the customers? And not...
Doing good by the customers is like, if you're going to sell your services to a customer, right? The customer is like that. That's the top priority.
Yeah.
Not so much, the doing well by your, compatriots. Although, that could be a consideration. And the other thing is I want to do well by me, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's funny. We were just on a call with Jack, and he was referencing the piper that played for Princess Anne's funeral or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't exactly remember. But just what a great performance that was. If someone calls me for a high profile gig, I want to think very carefully about whether or not I can do my personal best for the customer. Another one is like funerals are just kind of obvious. That's a very sacred thing, and you're sending someone off kind of into eternity. If you don't know how to tune your pipes well, or if you know that you have 47 crossing noises in Amazing Grace, like that, you should probably not be in the market to play gigs yet. One man's opinion. Feel free to disagree, but like that would be the first thing I would say. Here's a real world example. I don't book St. Patrick's Day gigs.
Interesting.
I don't. I won't play in bars. Not going to do it. And like, I'm not going to do these weird things. I've done a few over the years, and I personally really do not enjoy that experience.
It feels like you're leaving money on the table by not doing that, so you must really not enjoy it, huh?
Well, but I think it would be the wrong thing to do, right? So if the bar's going to hire me, they want like a high energy guy who's stoked to be there, in the cesspool of super drunk people at their bar and just kind of like, and then hamming it up and doing all those fun things. I have no interest in doing that.
So you'd show up with an immaculate uniform and with technical proficiency, but not so much a party attitude. And what they're looking for is a party attitude.
Exactly.
I see.
Like, and I have zero interest in doing that. I suppose technically I'm turning down a bunch of money, but that's them's the ropes. I don't think it would be 100%, the right thing to just grab all those gigs and then show up and be kind of grumpy and not that happy about doing it.
Yeah. No, that's a nuanced view that I can appreciate. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then meanwhile, funerals and weddings, I know I could be that professional piper. I can, at least at this stage of my life, I can look fairly sharp. I can look the part, and I can sound really nice, and I can do I can do a great job. And so those are things to think about. Did that answer the question, or did I?
That's the first step there. That's like, should you do the gigs or not in the first place? So then, say you've decided, like, no, I do feel confident. I think I could do a good job. Now I'm going to get out there in the market. How do you get out there in the market?
Right. If you feel, here's another, just another thing that'll help bridge the gap. If you feel like the best price to quote the client is a price that is lower than the competition, it's a good sign you're not ready to do this yet. Right? So the thing, like, what's the right price to quote, or how are you going to interact with potential leads? It's like, my personal view on this is I would never compete on price. Okay. I would decide what I think my performance is worth, and that's going to be the price that I quote the potential lead.
So you keep that internal where you're going, what am I worth? Not what is so-and-so charging, two towns over. I'm going to undercut him by $20.
Yeah. You're never going to win that battle. And it's going to be kind of discouraging, right? Like I'm not going to, we already talked about how at a gig, most gigs, I want to produce my personal best musical and aesthetic performance, right? Yeah. I'm not going to do that for $125. Just not going to do it. Right. And there are guys out there who are going to put together a less than optical musical performance. Maybe they'll look the part, but for $125, I think the odds that they're less than optimal looking is probably high as well. Right. So that has to that's going to inform my decision. And then another tip thing, something I've learned over 30 years of playing and doing a lot of gigs and stuff is you're not charging them for your appearance at the gig. You're charging them for that plus all of the preparation that goes into doing a good job, which includes getting the kilt and the spats, not the spat, I don't wear spats, but the kilt and the spats and the shirt and the tie properly pressed and looking sharp and doing all that stuff. And then, for me to get my bagpipe to sound absolutely optimal at a gig, that requires probably 2 hours total of bagpipe prep, like leading up, getting the pipes warmed up. So I'm really charging them for like 3 or 4 hours of, highly skilled work.
Yeah.
Right. So
that could be one of the frustrating things when a customer reaches out to you and says, I only need 10 minutes of piping. It's like, well,
correct.
Okay. But you're still 2 hours of prep, whether they need 10 minutes or an hour, it's still all that prep. Yep.
And another tip is I bill additional for any travel time beyond half an hour. So, and I make sure that the client kind of knows that. And, some clients will say, no, thanks, that's too much money. Yeah. And then, you could play one gig for the right amount of money. Okay. And that saves you from having to play 2 or 3 gigs for the wrong amount of money. Okay. Now, I'm a very experienced piper. I do this for a living, and I feel like I can produce a high quality thing. So I'll just give you some examples. So generally speaking, my starting rate for a wedding is $500, based on some of the stuff that we've already talked about. And then it would be additional money for any rehearsals that were needed, or if the travel was further than half an hour away. Right?
Weddings tend to take a long time too, so you got to be ready for that.
And the clients are more difficult to please. Right. So that it all goes in, and it's like no one's to blame for that. I don't know.
Why wouldn't they be on their wedding day, right?
But exactly. So especially when it comes to the, for the bride, usually, I'm generalizing, wouldn't always be true, but the bride is, often extremely interested in that being like the absolute best day of their life. Think about that for a second, right? We don't want to try and undercut the market here. We want to give them the right price so that we can actually contribute and be incentivized to participate in the best day of these people's lives, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So it's all goes into why that price needs to be what it is. Okay. And by the way, that's my price. Maybe you want to charge less, or maybe you even want to charge more. Like, it's all up for you, all up to you. You got to do that right. And of course, let's be real. We're not going to play gigs and take a loss. Right. Right. So there's we need to make a profit in our, playing of gigs as well. We don't want to make an immorally, ridiculously high profit, but, we want to make sure it's worth it at the end of the day. So that's my wedding thing. Now I feel like, and then my funeral starting rate, this might surprise you. The funeral starting rate is half that. So if I get a call for a funeral, so my rate is $250. And then the same sorts of things apply. Like, you don't usually have to rehearse for a funeral, but if you did, that would be additional. And then if I have to travel further than half an hour, that's also additional. But I feel like the clients are way lower maintenance, and sometimes your client is actually the funeral home, right? So the client is way lower maintenance, and that's not a judgment. That's just a fact, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like here's the job we need you to do, and then usually the performances are really simple, and it's just kind of like we just kind of need you to play Amazing Grace at the end and then wander off into the distance. Cool.
Yeah.
So because that is so much easier, and then the other thing I personally believe is like, like a funeral is really important.
Yeah.
And it's like a hugely, you want to help people when they're going through these difficult times. And like, funerals are expensive and it's not going to be that hard for me to do a good job here. So the price is significantly lower for the funeral. And that I've arrived at that over many years of playing gigs.
It actually makes... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I guess I was just going to say that's what I think about that. And then I was going to hand it over to you.
Well, it's is the word encouraging? It's somehow good to me to hear exactly, because actually after a few years of gigging myself, I've also arrived at exactly the same spot where funerals are half the starting price of weddings for me as well. Yeah. So that feels about right to me for sure. So how do you get them though? Do you reach out to wedding planners to get in their books? Do you reach out to funeral homes to get cards on their front desk? Or are you getting on Gig Salad, getting on indoor yard sale groups on Facebook, start a website, try to build some SEO?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I've done it all over the years. Mm. And so it all depends on how much you want to do with gigs, right? Mm-hmm. Like for me, at this point in my bagpiping career, I do no promotion. And I'm really honestly not interested in doing any gigs. You know what I'm saying? Like I personally, I'm not in the gig market, so I don't do anything. I have leftover website from when I did want to do a lot of gigs, and that will still sometimes generate gigs for me. And then when people contact me and say, hey, can you do a gig? 9 times out of 10, I'm referring them onward because I'm not like super interested. But sometimes it's like, hey, I've got a gig that's 2 minutes from your house and it's on a day when you're not busy and I'm happy to pay the price that you want. And it's like, cool, I'll do a gig. No problem. But for me personally, it's on the more rare side at this point. Now, meanwhile, back when I was young, like that was a big part of my income. Mm-hmm. So I tried it all. I did the Gig Salad. I did the, I did the mail merge and tried to contact all the funeral homes. Another thing to do is just get to know other gigging pipers in your area and share leads back and forth with each other. Like, Pat will give me the gigs he can't do, and I'll give the gigs to Pat that I can't do. And it kind of ends up, help others to help yourself kind of thing. That might be one of the most successful things. I
found that to be huge too. Like maybe along the same lines of not undercutting your fellow pipers on price, is that like there need not be like a competitive attitude. Like what I found is that with a small network of friends who also play pipes in the area, the amount that we're able to share gigs between each other, not only does it make it so we all end up playing more, it also helps all of our individual brands, if you will, because none of us has to turn things down, right? We always deliver for our funeral homes or for our wedding planners or whatever it is because we can share stuff around.
Yep, exactly. Cheaper gigs, for lack of a better word, they're not necessarily cheap, but there might be a gig where someone can't afford me. Mm-hmm. I know exactly who to send them to. It would be maybe a slightly less experienced piper, someone who wants the hustle life a little bit more. And I could say, you know what? So-and-so is like going to be a great fit for you. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not in position to do that. My rates are higher. I'm, two-time. No,
I'm kind of a big deal. People know me.
Kind of a big deal. No, you don't have to do that, right? You just say like, I'm sorry, that's my price, but I have several connections that will do an excellent job for you. And here's their contact information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, that's how I approach it. I found it very difficult to, make any sort of relevant amount of money playing gigs where I live. Mm-hmm. There's some competition, a lot of which is very high quality here. So I'm going to just be one of several, good options. And then it's not a huge city. Now, meanwhile, when I lived in Boston, I had several good friends that quite literally made most of their living playing gigs.
Mm.
You know, and that's cool. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it worked out. They were kind of in it. And by the way, a lot of the things we're talking about, like they didn't compete on price. Like, this is the price. This is how it's going to go down. I'm going to pay you for additional, you're going to pay me for additional travel. Like, all of that came into play. And then sharing around, you know, like, you know, they would all share gigs with each other. And it's like, hey, this one's closer to you. Can you do it? Cool. And it was with the understanding that, you know, when the Worcester gig came along, you know, that was going to get passed along to so-and-so, and it all worked out really well.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just kind of like every now and then I'll do a gig and it's nice found money. You know, in the spring and in the fall, like the gigs can actually be kind of pleasant, you know. And then
you don't do midwinter
right,
funerals.
In midwinter, it's like, man, like the people better be, you know, better be ready to pay my full rate.
Yeah.
In the middle of winter, good Lord. And then in the middle of they don't have that many funerals outside in the middle of the winter, but if I have done a few.
Oh yeah. I've
over
done
the years.
some too.
Yep. And at one time recently, a really cold one, we had our local fire chief from my actual sort of hamlet where we live in New York. He passed away, and my neighbor was deputy chief or something like that, and he asked me if I would do it, and I said yes, I'll do it. And I basically did it for free. I don't think they paid me any money, but like it was a lot of super cold outdoor playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those, you know, those are the ones that you just kind of just do.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe let's start with weddings. What do you typically do at a wedding? Because here's the thing, I feel like maybe more so with funerals and less with weddings, but to some degree, people know they want bagpipes, but they might not know exactly what they want the bagpiper to do. And so it's very helpful if you can say, here's what I usually would do. Now, what do you want changed from that? And usually they'll say, yeah, do that. Do what you said.
Not only is that important, but I would put it right on my website. Mm-hmm. By the way, this is what my recommended stuff I do for weddings is. Bam. And like, you're going to explain what you're going to do, and then you'll give sound examples of the tunes that they might want to hear, and just put it right there. Yeah. Like here's what Highland Wedding sounds like. Here's what Highland Cathedral sounds like. Here's what Mari's wedding sounds like. You know, like just give them a lot of options, because that'll make them less likely to ask you to play like some really mysterious hymn that doesn't actually, you know, or you know, things that you're not comfortable playing. So
a pop tune that doesn't fit on bagpipes.
You're right. Yeah. And then you have to tell them no, which is, you know, or you have to tell them, or you tell them yes, and you realize later it was a huge mistake to tell them yes. Or you tell them yes, and you forget all about it until the morning of the gig, and then you're like, oh.
Listening to it all the way there, trying to figure it out on the practice channel.
I told them I would play that tune, and I did no work. So, so to have that prepackaged stuff is really useful. And so you get all the tune samples up there, and it's you playing it. So now they know you sound good, and this is roughly what you're going to sound like doing that, which is cool. And they'll usually just pick that. But then also, like, here's what I recommend. And, you know, don't look at my actual website. I don't think I've actually followed my own advice here. But what I would put up there, if I can remember the username and password to edit my old website, it would be like, you know, you want the piper to play on and off, you know, in the 15 minutes while people are walking into the church. Like, that might be something that you want. You do not want me to play continuously for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. You know, that just makes guests want to stab their eyeballs out. Even though I'm a pretty good piper, nobody wants that. Like the client thinks they want that, but they don't want that. The bagpipes are loud. It makes it hard to have a conversation. So, like, I recommend on and off as people are coming in, perhaps on and off as, you know, during the receiving line at the end. Right. But like, that's what I would try to explain to the client and get them to agree to. And then, like, I'm all for playing the bride up the aisle. I'm all for playing at the back of the church and then letting the bride kind of pass by. That's like the ideal, because then you don't have to worry about too much choreography.
Totally.
And then playing them out as they come out. Like, piper stationary is better logistically. Piper doing things up and down might look better, but but that makes it more complex. And then it makes
every chance to trip or fall over or something is let's minimize those.
I accidentally I played a friend's wedding once. I forget the exact story, but they always remind me, like, something along the lines of, I basically bumped into the photographer and like smashed their camera lens
Oh
because
gosh.
the photographer didn't realize that I was coming down, and like there was like this big interruption or something. And yeah, like, and then so more choreography, the more likely they are to want you at the rehearsal. Rehearsal is going to
Right.
cost more money. So like, I sort of try to professionally explain that.
Yeah.
That's what
So
we do.
setting
That's kind of
expectations
what
from
we
the
do.
beginning, you can really avert problems. If you start with, yeah, $200, I'll come play your funeral or your wedding. And then it's like, oh, you want me for rehearsal? Okay, well, that's another $100, right? Oh, you want me to
Yeah.
play 3 times over the course of 5 hours? Okay, it's actually going to be $700. That's not nearly as nice as starting with like, here's what I recommend and here's the price for that, and then work from
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yes, exactly. And we were already kind of talking about that. Make sure you just kind of have that offering kind of ready to go. And of course,
Yeah.
you could do bespoke things if somebody really wants, some family tune like that. But if it's something that I don't already know that I have to learn, put that in the pricing sheet.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like, yep, I can learn this new tune that I've never heard of, but it's $100.
Hmm.
Cool. Like get paid for doing the service we've already been over this. That would be my recommendation.
Do you feel like
get paid for what it costs to do a great job.
I feel like too with weddings, like over time, like I didn't figure this out for a while, but I've begun to figure out that it's great to go and say hello to the photographers and the DJs. Partly because they might be able to reference work to you later, but also partly because you might want to coordinate with that DJ at the after party, and you might want to get some photos from that photographer after the event.
By the way, after party costs more money.
Yeah, better, right?
Yeah.
Or cost more money and feed you and stuff, right?
Yeah. Hey, do you mind coming over to the reception hall and just playing a few more minutes? Answer. For more money, yes.
Yeah, because you'll be there for 6-7 hours.
You need to think of, yeah, exactly. And like you can end up feeling guilty for not. You could end up feeling guilty if you leave. But yeah, so that wedding performance, it's like you get 1 hour of performance window time, and
Right.
anything significantly beyond 1 hour is X number of dollars per hour. Like
Yeah, here's my additional
that's how
hourly.
I roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you could do that differently, but over many years, I've experienced that it's like this is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
And it needs to be that way because then you get someone asks you to do something off the cuff, and you're like, I guess I kind of have to say yes because I didn't really lay out any expectations, and like, here I am, and yeah, it can be tough. Weddings cost more for this reason because they'll do that to you, and not that they're like nasty people or anything, but yeah, they'll end up realizing, oh, this piper's cool and people are really digging it. So like, hey, can you stay at the reception and like play Hava Nagila? And the answer is like, bro, we talked about this.
Yeah.
Like you booked me for this, and
But if you've set it up from the beginning with what your additional hourly is, etc., then they can say, "Hey, can you come and do this? I'll for sure pay you for it." And that's the ideal situation.
Yep. Cool.
So, what about funerals? Because that's a different animal, right?
Yes.
And I know that I know some pipers who like to play the funeral and like stick around to talk to people afterward, and that's fulfilling to them, and that they build a network that way. For me personally, I've never felt super comfortable doing that. I kind of want to disappear while I'm still playing. I park my getaway vehicle, drive away entirely. But that's my style. There's different ways. Tell me about how you would do a funeral.
So 100%. So like one of the biggest, you mentioned the getaway vehicle, like that's the number one thing. And like, it sounds a little goofy and weird, but like, it's just, you're right in the sense that figuring out where to position your vehicle is a clutch element of a little pun there, clutch, something like that.
Car humor.
It's a clutch element of the process. So like you don't want to park your car right in the middle where you get stuck and you can't leave until everyone else leaves. So I usually like put my car somewhere in the cemetery, but like where it's seen like close to the exit. So
pointing toward the exit too. You don't want to.
Yep. And then I kind of learned that from doing a few gigs with Adam Holdaway, a great piper from Boston. He would do that Amazing Grace piper fades off into the distance thing every time. And I'd never really put two and two together. I'd never really done that. But it's a great way to do it. And it's very dramatic and cool. So you play Amazing Grace once through, And on the second time through, you just start to do the bagpiper pibroch wander kind of off into the distance. And then you disappear over the hillside and, hey, what do you know? Your vehicle's right there and like you're ready to go.
You mentioned hillside. That's the ideal. That's why I love cemeteries that are on hills, because then you can hide your car and you can disappear and the sound fades away. That's the perfect situation.
Yeah, like it's worth kind of figuring out those little aesthetic details. It really is. And it might not always work out perfectly, and that's okay. I agree with you. I don't think the piper hanging around and mingling is quite the right look if you can avoid it.
Well, and here's I have friends who do it and seem to do it really well is the thing. So like it definitely doesn't work for me, but for them, like it seems to be like fulfilling to them personally and to the families. They seem to have a knack for it. So maybe it's just a skill set I don't possess, right? But
yeah, it's a go with the flow. It's a go with the flow thing, know. But figuring out the positioning seems to be key, and then And then with the funeral, like I said, I don't bill as much. However, if they want you to play at the church and at the graveyard, that's more money.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's two different things. And then the church is usually similar to the weddings. They're like, hey, can you play as people come in? Absolutely. That's great. Or as people leave, or as people are getting into the limos or whatever to go
play the casket to the hearse or something like that.
Yeah, like all that's on the table. It's all of that's good. And then that little tidbit where, just for the record, you don't actually want me to play continuously for half an hour as people come in, right? Mm-hmm. It's like it would be much better to just go. I usually go like 1 minute on, 2 minutes off or something, continuously for half an hour. That tends to be a good mix. Also, like especially at half an hour, you might get a few people coming in, and you don't actually need to play for 5 minutes because no one's actually coming in. And so just sort of like when you play a parade, like you don't want to play the entire time.
Yeah, that's an expectation that I learned after a few gigs to set, that like if I set an expectation that I would be playing continuously as people arrived, and then the first two cars show up and I start playing, it's like then I'm stuck playing for maybe 30, 40 minutes before everybody's there. So set the expectation you need breaks and stuff.
Yeah, and then I think let's conclude this discussion just by saying I think everybody's going to have their own style, and it's probably totally fine. The only thing I would encourage is just that your style is, provides maximum value to the client. And however you deliver that, as long as the client is getting great value out of you being there, that's the name of the game, and I'm all for it. Mm-hmm. The problem with undercutting the price, right, and going cheap, the problem with that is the more you do that, the less and less you will be incentivized to do a great job. And then if you think about it over time, that's a bad look.
For sure.
Right? Oh, I got another funeral today I got to go do. Right? That's not how you want to approach a funeral. But that can happen if you're just charging $90 for a funeral. By funeral number 10, that's going to be your attitude. Yeah. I want to make sure for a funeral, that's like, man, if I had a piper for a funeral like of a loved one that had that attitude, that would be bad. I would be very upset by that. So I charge enough money that it's like, okay, cool. I'm, got $350 here because I'm playing at the church and the graveyard. $350, cool. Like I'm gonna iron my shirt. I'm gonna trim up the beard or whatever a little bit. Try and make sure I look the part, and then I'm gonna get the pipe sounding good, and it's no big deal. I'm getting enough compensation to make it totally worth it, and I'll be able to deliver an excellent product to the client, period. And then just to reiterate, it takes more money to make me excited about doing that for a wedding. But therefore, that's why I need to charge that more money, because if I don't, then I'm going to end up not being the best version of myself at those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way that it is. Like weddings are, need to be the most perfect, dazzling, aesthetically pleasing day of people's lives. And so, to get me into that role, it takes a little bit more to incentivize me personally. And so that's why I price things a little bit higher.
Yeah, totally did.
It's also, just by the way, basic economics, supply and demand, right? If there's a lot of demand, but not a lot of pipers, you can charge more and probably should, right?
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, if it's tons of demand but also tons of pipers, the price will probably have to come down a little bit in order to land. And then meanwhile, if there's tons of supply of pipers but not that much demand, that could play into things too.
Yeah.